All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to have you here this evening for our introduction to mind-body medicine, self-care, and self-regulation. We're going to start by stopping. So I'm going to invite you to just take a moment and adjust your posture. Just wiggle a little bit. Use the movement in the body as an indication to you that you're going to do something different than sort of everyday mind, if you'd like. So I'm going to invite you, once you've moved, to come to stillness. Allow your eyes to soften or even close if that's comfortable for you. And very intentionally, very purposefully, invite your attention to come down to the soles of your feet resting on the floor. And just take a moment to really notice, really appreciate the feeling of your feet touching the floor, the earth beneath. Noticing the firmness of the floor, maybe the temperature of the floor and how that's different than the temperature of the body. Allow your attention to begin to move up into the body and feel the body being supported by the chair, the touch points between the body and the chair, the weight of the body. You're actually feeling the energy of gravity when you notice your weight. And begin to notice that there might be other sensations present in the body as well that you can just simply recognize and acknowledge as best as you can without jumping into interpreting or thinking about anything. Just observing. And then inviting your awareness to begin to notice the experience of the body being breathed. The feeling of the breath flowing in on the inhale. The feeling of the breath flowing out on the exhale. No need to attempt to change the breath in any way. We're just noticing how it is, moment by moment. And then letting go of awareness of the breath as your primary focus just now, and opening your awareness into the soundscape. Just listening, hearing whatever sounds might be occurring in the room, within you, maybe even outside the room and outside the building. Just listening. Directing your attention very specifically to the sound of the chime as I ring it to end our opening practice. All right, thank you. So this practice that we just started with is one of the most important things I think that you can do for yourself over the course of your lifetime, is to actually create a habit where you're intentionally taking brief little moments, doesn't even have to be as long as we did that grounding practice for, to step out of the busy hamster wheel of everyday mind and into the present moment. So the grounding can be related to and to be oriented towards anything in your experience that occurs only in the present moment. Sensations in the body, awareness of the breath, any one of the five senses. These only ever occur in the present moment. So to make it simple, we do call this a grounding practice. Some of you might know it as a centering practice or a focusing practice. I like the term grounding because we start feeling ourselves connected to the earth, if you'd like, grounded like a mountain, stable. So my invitation to you, if there's only one thing you take out of tonight's session, is to create a habit for yourself where you're doing this frequently through the day for short snippets. And of course, what that's going to mean is that you're going to need some type of reminder to trigger you to remember to step off of that busy mind that we carry and to very specifically take a moment to just notice what the present moment entails. That could include being attentive to what your task is at the moment. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So tonight's session, the introduction to mind-body medicine, self-regulation, self-exploration, we're going to focus predominantly on the self-regulation side of the coin. And self-regulation is exactly what it sounds like. It's learning to regulate, to manage some of your own functions, if you'd like. I'd like to start by sharing with you some core science that feeds what it is I'm going to be sharing with you in the way of practice. Mind-body medicine is a sort of a modern terminology for ancient wisdom, and that ancient wisdom has been present in human cultures pretty much forever. The basic underlying science behind that was the recognition that the mind, body, spirit, and environment are deeply interconnected. So much so you can think of them as being on a continuum. In other words, they're not separate at all. So that understanding has been present in most of our cultures forever. 300 years ago, 400 years ago, with the advent of the scientific method and the sort of building of thoughts around how to measure things, we discovered that we could pay attention to and measure the physical side of the world, including ourselves. We didn't have ways to understand and measure the mind or the spirit or really the environment other than to be able to measure what we can see and weigh, for example. So with the advent of the scientific method, much of our research, much of our science, much of our looking at the world shrunk down to just the physical stuff. And we lost sight, if you'd like, over these hundreds of years to the deep connection between these different components. Fortunately, modern science is actually beginning to bring all of that back. We now have means of beginning to study and think about the mind and research the mind, and to study and think about the spirit and research the spirit, and to really understand the environment, and now to really understand this connection or continuum. In the last 25, 30 years, a whole new science called psychoneuroimmunology and psychoneuroendocrinology have developed that's really about how all of these things work together and integrate, and how they affect each other. So if you want to learn more about those things, then I would encourage you to do some of that research, and some of those terminologies can help you begin to do that. So that's the core understanding that we're operating under. There are three other very specific pieces of science that I'd like to share with you for the next few minutes that sort of feed into why I'm going to be teaching the things that I'm going to be teaching you tonight in the way of self-regulation. But before I do that, I'd like to say just a little bit more about what you might think of as mind-body medicine and its nature and its function, if you'd like. I'm going to make the presumption that most of us are here tonight because we desire to live our life in our own house of well-being. So your house of well-being, like any other structure, needs to have a good, solid foundation for it to get built. If the foundation isn't solid, or if it isn't there at all, then your house of well-being is not going to have much of a chance of being built and to stand. So the question is, what might be the foundation for our house of well-being in this sort of metaphor? And some of you might be familiar with the term determinants of health. So your determinants of health might be understood as the foundation for your house of well-being. I like to think of those determinants of health as falling into two groupings. One grouping we can think of as the social determinants of health. In simple terms, I like to think of the social determinants of health as how the world is with you. So here's the question. How much influence do you have on how the world is with you? Anybody? Yeah, I'm seeing a few zeros. Not very much. How the world is with you is something that, for the most part, you don't have very much control over. This would include your genetic allotment, but it would also include where in the world you're born, the culture that you're born into, the social systems that are available to you in the province or the country or the county that you're born into. It would include the education systems and the health systems. It would include the social support networks and unemployment insurances and all those sorts of things that are provided basically by our social structures and our government agencies. So the primary way in which you have influence is through your vote. So here's my one political statement. Make use of your franchise. Be sure that you're voting for policies that are going to support your health and well-being. So mind-body medicine understands the critical aspect of the social determinants of health. It's really, really important that you have an environment that feeds your well-being, that fosters your house of well-being to be built. And it advocates strongly for those things. But mind-body medicine's primary orientation is to helping you work with what you might think of as the personal determinants of health. So I like to think of those as how you are with the world, yourself, and others. So if you reflect on that for a moment, how much influence might you carry on how you are with the world, yourself, and others? Quite a bit more. These are about choices that you make. Now, mind you, a lot of our choices are limited by some of these things, but if we put our mind to it, we can make specific choices about how you're going to be with yourself through the course of the day, how you're going to be with the world through the course of the day, and how you're going to relate to others through the course of the day. I like to think of these personal determinants of health as falling into, if you'd like, two categories. A general category, so these are the common sense things. What are some of the personal things that you can, choices that you can make around your lifestyle, for example, that would fall into that general category that we would all sort of think are pretty commonsensical? You all probably ate dinner tonight, right? So nutrition would fit into that category. Any other thoughts? Exercise, physical conditioning, yeah. Anything else? Interactions with others, so social interactions. We are social beings, and we know that social connection is hugely important for our health and well-being, and we have some capacity to engage in that. Anything else? Spiritual practice. Also, we are spiritual beings. Having a spiritual practice, we know, is one of those foundations that fosters your health and well-being. Any other thoughts? Yeah, if you can make some choices around that, you can maybe choose an environment that's going to be particularly suited to your well-being needs. There's another part of the social component called prosociality, which also sort of overlaps a little bit with the spiritual and mind components. Prosociality has to do with what you might think of as altruism. It has to do with your generated intentional interest in the well-being of others in your community, not just your immediate family. And we know that when you act for the well-being of others, it actually feeds your own well-being. So these are things that I'm sort of listing in sort of the general category. But then there's a set of what you might think of as specific things that you can do that are a little bit more narrow in their undertaking, if you'd like, than the generalities that I've just talked about here. And these are the things that I'm going to use the science to help you understand why I'm pointing them out as beginning points. I'm just touching the surface of these things. We're going to offer sort of 3 core strategies this evening, but there's lots of other components that will expand on this as you get to understand these things more. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's come back to the science piece. So we've talked about the psychoneuroimmunology, psychoneuroendocrinology, the mind, body, spirit, environment continuum. What are these other 3 components? So the first one here, to make it really simple, I like to refer to it as the training effect principle. So I'll give you a very simple example of a training effect, one that you've all experienced and you would all understand. In fact, there are 7.5 billion of us on the face of the earth, and we intuitively, as human beings, have an understanding that this is the way things work. If I put a 5-pound weight in my hand and I start doing this half a dozen times, and I do that a half a dozen times a day, and I do that every day, what's going to happen to this muscle in a couple of weeks? Yeah, it's going to get bigger and stronger. Training effect. If I then take that 5 pounds away, and I keep exercising, but I now have 5 pounds less than it was used to, what's going to happen to that muscle? It's going to atrophy. It's going to get weaker again, smaller. That's also a training effect. So the training effect is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. But I am going to suggest to you at this point that it is one of the most important pieces of information that you can understand and then purposefully make use of through the rest of your life. So without getting into the nitty-gritty of what's going on inside the muscle fibers for them to adapt and change that way, I can ask a simple question about this training effect example, and I can use the question to build a statement of principle that we can then apply in our life. So the question I can ask is, what's actually happening in this example of lifting a weight? And what's happening is the muscle is having an experience, lifting. But that experience is coming with a demand. Lift 5 pounds more than it's used to. So the muscle adapts to the demand of that extra weight and gets bigger and stronger. In the second part of the example, muscle's having an experience of lifting once again, but the demand is now 5 pounds less than it had become used to, so the muscle adapts once again and gets smaller. So the training effect principle becomes just that. Muscles adapt to the demand of experience. Now, you might ask, why is that such an important thing? Well, it's such an important thing because you've noticed I've put muscles in quotation marks. It's important because muscles are just, if you'd like, a stand-in for all systems. all systems adapt to the demand of experience, not just the muscles of the body, not just all of your systems, but literally all systems. I like to think of the training effect principle as Mother Nature's gift to the universe. It lets systems of all kinds adapt to the demands of their experiences. So you won't find the training effect principle laid out in research articles this way. Neurobiologists refer to the training effect principle as neuroplasticity. Some of you may have heard of that, it's been in the news. Learning theorists refer to this as experiential learning, or experience-dependent learning, or reinforcement learning, or reward-based learning. And biologists, of course, would refer to it as what? Evolution. So these are just all, if you'd like, manifestations of what I'm capturing in this training effect principle terminology. Now, I use that terminology because it'll be easier for you to remember, and it points to the notion of training, practice. Repeated experience with demand has an adaptation effect. And we can make use of that to help ourselves regulate. You follow? So, the training effect principle, keep it in mind throughout the evening because it's going to have an influence on everything I talk about. The training effect principle naturally comes with implications that you can't avoid. The first implication stems from the fact that the training effect principle starts for you the moment you are conceived and then doesn't shut off. In other words, as soon as you're conceived, you go into training mode, and you're in training mode the rest of your life, whether you know it or not. In other words, you're constantly adapting to the demands of your experiences. The second implication is that as we collect our life experiences, we begin to adapt to them. We do that from day one. Before we're even a year old, we're already starting to collect patterns in the way we think. So we adapt to our life experiences by generating, if you'd like, patterns. Patterns of different kinds within us. So right from the beginning, we start to collect patterns in the way we think. The first patterns that we start to collect in this regard are often referred to as internal working models, and they have to do with the nature of relationships. And then, of course, you start to collect the do's and don'ts and shoulds and shouldn'ts, and then you start to collect your notions and ideas of yourself and your sense of yourself in the world and the sense of the world, and then you collect what you would call belief systems and worldviews, and we live out of those. We also begin to collect patterns in the way we feel, in our emotions, and how we learn or don't learn to regulate our emotions. We collect patterns in how the body gets held, not just in its outer postures, but in its inner postures, its inner workings. We collect patterns in the way the body's energy flows or doesn't, including the breath. We collect patterns in how we look at the outer world with our five senses or don't. We collect patterns in how we look at our inner world, get to know ourselves or don't, and we collect patterns in how we act, how we behave. So another implication is any single time one of these patterns that we've started to collect in the face of our life experiences, anytime one of those patterns comes up, in the moment it's like a muscle that's being worked out. So that pattern's actually getting stronger. It gets self-reinforced. And then another implication is that these patterns don't sit there in isolation. If I'm feeling a certain way, I'll start to think a certain way. If I'm thinking a certain way, I start to feel a certain way. If I'm feeling a certain way, I actually hold my body to match that. If I'm holding my body in a certain posture, it'll have an influence on how I feel. If I'm feeling a certain way, I breathe a certain pattern. If I breathe a certain way, it'll have an influence on how I'm feeling. You starting to see the picture here? These patterns don't sit there in isolation. They start to get interconnected, or what the scientists refer to as being coupled or linked. Every single time these patterns link together, or what the neuroscientists would say, fire together, they wire together. They get more and more strongly knit together. In other words, the linkages are also like muscles. So the next thing you know, you have a bunch of patterns that have become so tightly knit together that they come up as a package deal. And any component can trigger the whole package. And any time that package comes up, it's like a muscle getting worked out, and it's getting self-reinforced. You following? There's a whole host of different package patterns. I like to call them global patterns. We could carry global patterns of happiness and joy, but we can also carry global patterns of anxiety and worry and depression and PTSD and pain and guilt and anger and all those sorts of things. So these patterns come to us as developments from the demands of our life experiences over time. And then they just become, over the course of time, as this happens and they get reinforced, they simply just become habits of mind and body that we live out of. And of course, when they're a habit, we don't notice them. We just keep repeating them. So part of the work that we're going to be pointing ourselves to here is to actually begin to step back a notch and notice these patterns. Notice our habits. Some of them are going to be good for us and help us build our house of well-being. Some of them are going to be unwholesome. So we're going to want to catch them, if you'd like. So once again, keep this notion of the training effect principle in mind, because again, it'll be relevant to everything else I'm going to be sharing. Any questions about the training effect? Okay, so the second piece of science has to do with the fact that your brain isn't just billions of nerve cells sitting in your head. Your nerve cells have the capacity to link up. Each nerve cell has the capacity to link up with thousands of other nerve cells through little arms, if you'd like. And when they link up like that, neurons that fire together, wire together, when they link up like that, they create what are called neural networks. So a neural network has a structure of nerve cells, neurons, that are wired together. And that network has a certain structure and then a certain function and a certain chemistry. So you might have a neural network that constitutes your image and idea of a cat, for example. There are two neural networks that are quite important for you to have some knowledge about, so I'm going to speak to them very briefly here. There are many others, but these two stand out as they're relevant to our practice. One of them, the scientists refer to as your executive attention network. So just based on the name they've given it, what do you think the executive attention neural network does? What would its function or job be? Yeah, so one of its jobs is to be the CEO and guide how you use your muscle of attention, if you'd like, how you focus on things. Any other thoughts on that? So this is the neural network that gets lit up, or if you'd like, turned on, when you are really focused. on what you're doing. The scientists often refer to that as being task positive. You're positively oriented and attentive to the task that you're engaged in the present moment. So this neural network has an awful lot to do with wisely regulating your attention, choosing what's important to pay attention to, and sustaining your attention on that one thing. Now, the other neural network, the scientists refer to as your default mode network. What do you think the default mode network does or doesn't do? Somebody take a guess.
That's what I call squirreling.
Okay.
You have multiple thoughts within one moment. One's going in every different direction.
Yeah, thank you. Squirreling's good. Little red squirrels particularly. I got a bunch of those in my yard right now. I love those. Some people would call this, or in some traditions they would call it monkey mind. So this is the network that gets turned on when our mind is wandering around, when it's getting distracted, when it goes off to the past or off into the future, or when it goes off and starts to daydream, when you're doing the dishes and you're thinking about something else. In fact, default mode is essentially thinking about stuff. We get lost in thought. So if you think about it, that terminology is really common, isn't it? People say all the time they get lost in thought. What's lost? If you're lost in thought, what's lost? Your focus. Yeah, your attention, your concentration. So this network is really important as well. So first pointer to the grounding practice that we started with. What was the grounding practice inviting you to do? Yeah, the grounding practice was inviting you to come into executive attention mode, to turn it on. And of course, if your mind wandered away, the invitation was, notice that, bring it back. Now, if you take any time to step back a little bit and notice your own mind working, you'll probably begin to notice that it's very much like a hamster wheel. I like to use that image because we're all familiar with that. I was driving back from the hospital this morning, and I actually was paying attention to how my mind was working. And what I noticed was that virtually everything I saw in my environment, almost instantly, I had a commentary about it. So rather than actually being attentive to just seeing what I was seeing, I was telling stories about it in my head. So that commentary is part of that sort of default practice, if you'd like. I get lost in thinking and miss the details. Another reason that this might be really important is that there's some research that shows us that the more time we spend in default mode, the less happy we are. So one of the things that you might want to consider doing if you want to try and build some measure of increased happiness for yourself is to see if you can start being in executive attention mode more often and catch default mode more frequently. Research actually tells us that we spend probably at least half our time in default mode. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you that default mode is a bad thing. It isn't. You would not want to go through your life and not have default mode. What we know now, in early parts of some of the research around this, is that default mode, especially when your mind is sort of off daydreaming, it actually gives a little break to your brain in its work, because this takes a lot of energy. The other thing that we have discovered about default mode, not me specifically, but the researchers, is that one of those aspects of default mode is connected to our creativity. So what we would like to do is be able to recognize when we're in default mode and make it either a wise intention, a choice, to purposefully go into default mode, to purposefully engage in the daydreaming. For most of us, we go into default mode and don't know we're there. It just spontaneously arises and we're locked in it. Any questions about the neural networks and those two modes of mind? Okay. The third piece of science is often referred to by the scientists as our approach modes or approach and avoidance systems. So I'm going to make a real scribble on the board here as we go through this piece of science, because it's going to help us use these pieces of science and develop our specific regulation practices. That's not very good. Let me do this again. There. So this is a very crude drawing of our brain. This is the spinal cord. This area here is our brain stem. It's involved in our instinctual functions. It's the most ancient part of our brain. And then there's a middle part of our brain in here that you can think of as your emotional brain, just to make it simple. To make it even simpler than that, I'm going to suggest that these two parts of the brain are so old and so integrated in us that I'm simply going to refer to them as our ancient brain, just to make it super simple. Now you'll also notice, again, this isn't the best drawing. I probably should have made this a little bit broader. Let's do that. There's a part of our brain up here. So this is the back of our brain. This is the front of our brain. There's a part of our brain up here at the front where your forehead is that actually looks like it's curled back on itself. Developmentally, that's exactly what it's done. This part of the brain functions like your CEO. This is where our executive functions reside. It's referred to as the prefrontal cortex. And its job as the CEO is to provide oversight to these lower order ancient brain functions. So it's developed itself and curled back so it's close to them. It doesn't have to send signals for so far if you'd like. So to make it really simple, we've got these two components to our brain and mind function. The ancient brain and this more modern executive brain. So when you have an experience, let's call that lightning bolt an experience. Let's start with an outside experience. When you have this outside experience, that outside experience is picked up in your distributed brain. Your brain isn't just in your head, your brain is in your body. It's picked up in the distributed system of your brain. It's delivered to the ancient brain. And to make it very simple, in your ancient brain, you can think of there being a monitor. I like to think of that monitor as your inner bodyguard. This monitor's job is to scan and assess this experience and to determine pretty much instantly whether this experience that you're having is a threat to your security or whether it's an opportunity for security. Is this experience I'm having a lion that's going to gobble me up or an apple that's going to feed me? Is this experience arms that are going to beat me or arms that are going to hug me? So this part of your brain has to make that decision very fast because your life could depend on it. if through genetics, your predetermined set point, if you'd like, and past experience, your inner bodyguard makes the assessment, the appraisal, that this experience you're having is a threat to your security, it immediately sends out an alarm signal. And that alarm signal is to get you ready for protection. What happens? You get ready for running or fighting, basically. So what happens in the body when that occurs? What happens to your blood pressure and your heart rate? They go up. So we get an increase in heart rate, we get an increase in blood pressure. What happens to your breathing? Yeah, your breathing rate goes up, and you get what I call stressed breath. Stressed breath is fast, short, it's tight, and it's shallow. Predominantly way up here in the chest. And of course, what happens in the muscles? Yeah, muscles get all tensed up. We get full attention. Maybe just in one or two places, or maybe all over. You might get some type of elimination experience because you're better off running away from a lion, running away with an empty stomach, empty bowel, and empty bladder. And your brain and mind become hyper vigilant, hyper alert for more threats, for more lions, for ways out, anything negative in your environment. You follow? So this is a good thing, because it's what gets you safe, protects you. And it all happens really, really quickly. Now, if the bodyguard, inner monitor, doesn't appraise this experience to be a threat, it doesn't send out any alarms. And the signal that's been going up the system carries on up into the executive brain. And the executive brain, to make it simple, also, if you'd like, has a monitor. But its job is to monitor that monitor to be sure it's got it right or wrong, and to provide, if you'd like, modulation, to provide regulation for what's going on. For this part of your brain to do its work, it needs to, one, receive the signal, and then it also needs to communicate with other areas of the brain to make sense of everything. So the fact that this part of the brain needs to integrate with other areas of the brain makes the functions of your CEO monitoring a little bit slower than the very fast functions of the ancient brain's bodyguard system. So that's an important point. I'll come back to it in a minute. When the threat alarm system is triggered by your bodyguard, it sends out that alarm signal. But at the same time, it doesn't want, if you'd like, metaphorically, it doesn't want the slower functions of your executive brain getting in the way of you getting out of the way of a real lion. So at the same time that this alarm signal is being sent out, your bodyguard also sends out an inhibition signal. Inhibit. That puts the executive brain, if you'd like, offline in our modern terminology. It's not immediately available to you. Now, the other thing that happens at this point, so all this is sort of acute. It happens, in the moment that you're having this experience of threat. But where does all of this stuff happen? All of this stuff is happening where? In the body. So all of this stuff that we're experiencing in the body becomes a new experience, except this time it's an inside experience. That inside experience is picked up by your distributed brain in just the same way all the other experiences are. It's not treated any differently. And that inside experience, all of this stuff reaches my inner monitor, and my threat appraisal goes, oh my goodness, look what's going on in Bill's body. Bill's already fighting lions. There must be lions out there. And it sends that alarm signal and that inhibition signal out again and again and again. So now what's happening is that I've got this repetitive experience that's carrying the demand, protect, 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 protect. There's lions around, there's lions around. So if you think of this system, this protection alarm system, which is often referred to by the scientists as our avoidance system, avoid being eaten. If you think of that like a muscle, what's happening to it? It's getting worked out. That avoidance system becomes, if you'd like, relatively overdeveloped. And now I'm going through my life, because this is with me all the time, I'm going through my life looking for lions, if you'd like. Things become negatives. So this isn't a real lion any longer. This system of threat was designed for real lions. What I'm dealing with now are the metaphoric lions that are related to our sense of self, our own psyche, our understanding of who we are. You following? Now, of course, if my avoidance system is getting extra workout and it's getting to be an overdeveloped muscle, what's happening to the muscle of my opportunity system? Exactly. It's staying relatively, if you'd like, underdeveloped. So it's effectively weaker than that. And if my executive brain's functions are getting put offline regularly, and you think of the executive brain's functions as a muscle, what's happening to them? They're also relatively underdeveloped, relatively too weak. Relatively underdeveloped. So essentially, what we've got here, in a metaphoric sense, it's a three-muscle system, where one muscle has gotten overstrong and two muscles are underpowered. So if you were going to go to the gym and work to bring balance back to a three-muscle system where one's overstrong and two are weak, what would you do?
Work the two that are weak.
You'd work the two that are weak, and you wouldn't work the one that's strong. That's exactly what I'm going to invite you to do through the rest of your life. Now, when you're doing that, you're in the process of self-regulating all of this ancient part of your brain's functions and your modern part of your brain's functions. You're really beginning to work with your autonomic nervous system, where all this stuff is beginning to take place. So where are we going to start? What are we going to do? Well, if my breath is short, fast, if it's shallow and tight, that signal's going to get fed back to my bodyguard monitor, and my bodyguard monitor is going to go, ooh, Bill's running away from lions, and it's going to keep it doing it. So what might I do? Yeah, I might engage in very intentional, slow, relaxed breathing. That's what we're going to start doing in a few minutes. If my muscles are all tensed up, what might I do to send a different signal back to that ancient brain's bodyguard? What do we call that? Yeah. We might intentionally engage in some form of relaxation practice. Now, if I'm going to make the choice to do these things, where does that choice come from? What part of my brain? Executive attention brain. So making the choice to do that, I'm working out that part of the brain. On top of that, for me to make that choice, I have to notice what pattern I'm in to begin with. True? So we want to do that by focusing our attention, using our executive attention network of this executive brain to actually begin to notice how I am in the moment. So this is what we refer to as focused attention practice. So these are the three things that we're going to start with as the basis, if you'd like, the foundations for beginning to work with our self-regulation practices. So we'll, very shortly, I'll just invite you to stand up and wiggle around, take a little bit of a local break, don't go anywhere, get the blood flowing as it were, and I'll clean the board off and get ready to start you on some breathing practices. So before we do that though, any questions about this?
Would that be like if you're panicking?
Yes. Yeah, so what that panic experience is this alarm system in super high gear. And anxiety is an example of just that pattern running sort of as a freebie. It just is a habit that has been trained out of experience through demand, and it just keeps itself going.
It's like the quality of that thought process, right?
Yeah. So it has to do, to a large degree, with our physical experience and then how it's appraised. And that appraisal system, unless you make it more in the radar of your conscious awareness, then it's going to be below the radar and you're not going to notice that appraisal happening. So that's one reason why we want to build that focused attention, so we can begin to be attentive to these sorts of experiences. Now, I'm not saying doing all this stuff is easy, so we have to start with relatively simple strategies and just slowly build on those.
The training effect, like the gym, like I just constantly thinking of that and the breathing, you know, it's
really important. Yeah. So I'll just, any other questions or thoughts? So I'm just going to invite you to stand up, walk around your chair, shake your booty, do a little something to get the blood flowing. You've been sitting for an hour, and I'll rub this off and get ready for this section on breathing practice. Any questions from the science piece? Clear as mud, as they say?
That's a lot to.
Yeah, so I don't, yeah.
It's 60 years of erasing and
Yeah,
removing.
yeah. So the good news is that training effect principle, your capacity to adapt to the demand of experience, never goes away. There are times in our life when it's really profound, like in early 5, 6, 8 years of living. And then it slows down a little bit, and then it builds again in our mid-teen years, and then it slows down a little bit, and then it builds again in our mid-20s. And then it sort of peters, but never goes away. They've actually done brain scan studies that have shown new brain formations and new brain connections happening in people who are actually on their deathbeds with severe illnesses. So this training effect is a real deal, and you can make use of it to change patterns. To do that, though, you have to want to do it, you have to choose to do it, and you have to repeat the experience with the demand you want over and over and over and over and over and over and over until that change has occurred and the other muscle has gotten weaker, metaphorically speaking. So essentially, that's what we're inviting ourselves to do, and we're going to start with these 3 patterns of slow, soft, relaxed breathing, or what's often referred to as belly breath, or baby breath. Focused attention practice to help us really build that executive attention side of things. And a very intentional relaxation practice. So I'm going to just share one specific form of that, of which there are many. And the relaxation practice I'm going to share with you, I share it because it comes from 50 years of hardcore research. It's an ancient practice, but with lots of modern science behind it, that many of the other relaxation practices just haven't had the depth of research around. So to start with the breathing, what I need to do before we actually get you breathing is to share with you a teeny bit about how breathing happens so that you'll know exactly what it is we're doing. So I've pictured on the board now your lungs, your windpipe, your trachea. You can think of the lungs as having, if you'd like, a basal layer, a mid layer, and an apex layer. So bottom, middle, and top, if you'd like. This black line here represents your diaphragm muscle. Your diaphragm is a very thin, mostly tendon muscle, so thin that if you picked it up, you could virtually see through it. When the diaphragm contracts, it tightens up like the skin of a drum. So instead of being loose and floppy like this, it gets tight like that. So when it tightens up, it effectively is moving down from your chest into your belly. When it moves down into your belly like that, because the chest is a closed environment, it creates a vacuum that sucks air into your lungs. Your diaphragm is the most effective muscle in the body for doing that. So it's often referred to as the primary muscle of respiration. But another thing is happening. When that diaphragm contracts like that, and it moves down and air is moving in, it has to push the contents of your belly out of the way. So your belly naturally is the contents are going to go down, they're going to go out and around. So there'll be a displacement feeling in your belly. On the inhale, it displaces down and out and around. So if you look at yourself in profile, this is your chest, here's your belly, here's your back. The diaphragm's in here, diaphragm moves down, and this area moves down, your belly moves out to the front, your back moves out to the back. So it's almost like you're doing this. When you exhale, the diaphragm relaxes, moves back up, helps push the air out of the lungs, and when that happens, the belly softens and the displacement falls back into place, so your belly moves back in towards the spine, spine moves back in towards the front. You follow? Now, there are another set of muscles called the intercostal muscles that run between the ribs. And when the intercostal muscles contract, they pull the rib from below up toward the rib above. But your ribs are not a cylinder. They're not built like a straight cylinder. Your ribs are more like a lampshade. So when the intercostal muscle pulls the rib below up, it's also pulling it out. So when you breathe in, your chest is doing this. And when it lifts up and out like that, it creates a vacuum that pulls air in. But it's not as efficient as the diaphragm in doing that, so the intercostal muscles are often referred to as the secondary muscles of respiration. And then the first rib doesn't have a rib above it, so it doesn't have intercostal muscles. But it has little muscles from the neck that come down onto that first rib and allow that first rib to get gently lifted when you inhale and dropped back down again when you exhale. You follow? This system is not so efficient, and it's often referred to as the tertiary muscles of respiration. we can really see those muscles working in newborns and young infants if they have some obstruction to the work that's being done down here. So what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes is we're going to run through a series of breathing practices that will help you begin to build familiarity with feeling the breath in the belly, to feel the movement of the diaphragm. And this is what we're referring to as relaxed breathing. Relaxed, soft belly breathing is often called diaphragmatic breathing. It's about the workings of the diaphragm. The diaphragm and the diaphragmatic breathing are intimately connected to that approach system in your autonomic nervous system. They're really connected to the calming and renewal side of our systems. So we'll do some time working with that. We're going to have an experience of experiencing the breath not just in the belly and the base of the lungs, but also in the mid part of the chest. And then we'll have an experience experiencing the breath in the upper part, moving up and down. So the belly moving out and back, the chest moving up and out, and the shoulders moving up and down. And then we'll take a moment and explore putting them all together, because the body isn't designed to breathe with just one of those. It's designed to breathe with all three of those things working in a synchronous way. I'll add a couple of other breathing practices along with this, and then I'll say a little bit more about those, and then we'll take another little break, and then I'll set it up for the last piece. Any questions before we practice? Okay. So I'm going to invite you to shuffle your weight on the chair again, and sit upright with your feet a little bit more than hip width apart. You keep your feet on the bolster because you want your feet flat on the floor, but you want your thighs to be parallel to the floor as best as you can. Sitting on the floor is fine as well. Do bring your back a little away from the chair, because if you're leaning it back in your chair, you're going to be slouching, so your spine won't be healthfully aligned. Invite the hands for the moment to just rest on the thighs, elbows hanging underneath your shoulders, and just allow a soft gaze onto the floor. Don't close your eyes at this point. And take a moment, we'll do a little bit of focused attention. Just take a moment like we did with the grounding practice and see if you can notice the feeling of the breath coming in and out. So to help you with that, I'm going to invite you to use your hands as biofeedback tools. So taking the left hand, let the thumb rest in your belly button and the hand rest on the lower part of your belly, and invite your right hand to come and rest in the middle of your chest. And then you have a capacity to sort of be attentive to the feeling of the hands on the body, and the hands will help you pick up any movement that's happening in the body as you breathe. So once again, just bringing attention to the feeling of the breath. Focusing in on this one thing is what we call focused attention. So we're doing a little bit of focused attention practice. And then very intentionally invite your attention to come down into the area of the belly, to the left hand resting on the belly, and purposefully begin to explore for feeling those movements of the belly on the inhale and the exhale. Feeling the belly gently expanding outward or down, feeling the belly moving to the front and the low back moving toward the back, perhaps away from the belly on the inhale. And then on the exhale, feel the belly soften and fall back in towards the spine. Feel the front of the belly and the back area sort of coming back together again, towards each other. So there's a gentle sense of expansion in the lower trunk as you breathe in, and a general sense of softening and falling inward on the exhale as you breathe in, out. Sometimes it can be helpful to exaggerate this experience of expansion and relaxation in the belly when you're breathing, just to help draw your attention to what it feels like with the expansion on the inhale and the falling back in toward the spine on the exhale. So one of the things that you could do is to test that out for yourself. Just imagine that your belly is like a balloon, and on the inhale you're purposefully going to sort of overinflate it and feel that expansion, and on the exhale you're going to draw the belly button back towards the spine, engaging the moving out of the air. So taking another exaggerated inhale, another exaggerated exhale, one more time, exaggerated inhale, and exaggerated exhale. And then just let the exaggeration of it go and see if you can continue to rest your attention on the feeling of the breath in the belly. Okay, so here's the challenge that we carry, or part of the challenge that we carry. Most of us spend our day upright, sitting or standing. When you're upright, the trunk muscles have to work extra hard to keep you upright in the face of gravity. So there's more tone in those trunk muscles. So it's not so easy to feel the movement when those muscles are sort of working to keep you upright. So there are a couple of things that we can do to help you increase your capacity to be aware of this movement of breath in the belly. They have to do with changing your posture. So one of the things you can do, I'm going to lie on the floor. I don't know whether that's going to affect you with your camera. One of the things that you can do is just lie down with your feet on the floor and your knees up. Let your hands rest on your belly. So now gravity's out of the picture. My trunk is naturally softer. If I were to put a big book on my belly, or if I were to put a 2-pound bag of flour or something like that, flour, sugar, no, we should stay away from those things. A big book, an encyclopedia, you put that on your belly, and then you actually have the feedback of the movement that you can feel. So you can't obviously do this through the course of the day, but there are 2 times in the day when you're already in that posture almost. First thing in the morning before you get out of bed, last thing at night before you go to sleep. Get your feet on the bed, get your knees up, put your hands in your belly, and really connect with that soft belly movement of breath on the inhale and the exhale. Just happens every day. You're already breathing. Make it a habit so that you do it every single day. You follow? Now, the other thing you can do through the course of the day when you are upright, or in very intentional practice, is to do this. Put your hands on your hips, just above the rim of your pelvis. Let your thumb rest in that little soft triangle. Let your index and middle fingers rest right in front of that prominent bone here that we call the anterior superior iliac spine, or as-is bone, and let your hands come parallel to the floor. So just taking this posture, from here, let your elbows come behind you. So draw your elbows back towards the wall behind you. What happens when you do this? Try it if you can. What happens when you do that? You're sitting up straighter, but what's happening in your chest? Chest is getting tight. So now what you're doing is you're limiting the capacity of the intercostal muscles to contribute as much to the breathing. Your posture is allowing you to actually give a little bit more experience to feeling the breath in the belly. So as you hold that posture, let the elbows come gently behind you, tightening the chest a little bit. Invite the eyes to close perhaps and bring your attention back down into the belly and see if you aren't a little bit more aware of the feeling of the movement of breath in the belly with this posture. The opening of the belly on the inhale, the softening falling back inwards on the exhale. One more time. Now let the hands come back onto the thighs. Let the elbows rest underneath the shoulders. And keeping your attention on the belly, see if you can actually continue to connect with the feeling of that movement of breath in the belly on inhale and exhale without the biofeedback of the hands in the posture. This feeling of movement of breath in the belly, soft belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, is what we're referring to as relaxed breath. So just allowing yourself to rest with this movement of breath in the belly is the way babies breathe, if you'd like. If we were to all go to the nursery right now and watch the newborn babies lying there in the nursery, undisturbed, and paid attention to their breathing, you'd notice their bellies moving deeply. And then if we scare them, not on purpose, but by accident, you'll notice that they tighten up, they hold their breath, and then they breathe really fast and the belly hardly moves. So right from the get-go, there's a difference between approach breathing, belly, and avoidance breathing in the chest. Okay. So any questions about that belly breathing? So my invitation to you is to practice it frequently. So the more frequently you practice it, the more familiar you are with this feeling of the breath here. The more familiar you are with it, the more you'll be able to recognize it when you're breathing that way and continue it. The more you'll be able to recognize when you're not breathing that way and make a shift if you need to. So we just keep working with that practice. For how long? Rest of your life. You're breathing all the time, so you actually don't need extra time. You just need some reminders to drop your attention and feel it for a bit. Okay, so let's put our hands back on our belly and our chest like we did to begin with. Soft gaze on the floor, or maybe even closing the eyes this time. Closing the eyes often helps us bring a little bit more awareness into our inner world. So once again, bringing attention to the feeling of the breath flowing in and out. No manipulation at the moment, just feeling it. So a short period of focused attention. And then, very specifically, very intentionally, bringing attention to the area of the chest under the right hand, and begin to notice the movement of the chest on the inhale and the exhale. You might begin to pick up that subtle lifting up and out as the breath flows in, and the dropping down and in on the exhale. So this chest breathing is often what we've fallen into habitually as adults and have carried it for years, so it may feel like your normal pattern. So doing something different, like the belly breath, may actually feel uncomfortable because you're not familiar with it. This is why we invite you to practice. We can also get more attentive to and more deeply aware of this experience of the breath in the chest by altering our posture once again. So I'll just have you look at me for a moment. What we're going to do this time is we're going to bring our hands up, tuck our thumbs under our armpits, let the thumbs come to rest on the rib that you feel there, bring the palms parallel to the floor and let the middle fingers come to touch across the front of your chest. And then from here, gently lifting the elbows up toward the ceiling. Now you notice when you do that lateral lift, you're tightening the belly a little bit now. So you're making it a little bit more challenging for the diaphragm to contribute. So as you hold this posture, taking a deep breath in through the chest, or into the chest, you'll notice you can feel the chest lift up and out, and the fingers might even come apart for you on the inhale. And then on the exhale, letting them drop back down together again. One more time. And then letting the hands come back down again, but keeping awareness in the chest. See if you can continue to connect with this feeling of the chest breath rising up and out on the inhale, down and in on the exhale, without the biofeedback of the hands and posture. Okay, so we'll invite you to practice doing that independent of doing this. You can do them in sequence, but you can do them independent, or you could just take a moment and do this and get familiar with the feeling of the breath in the chest. Of course, again, the more familiar you get with what it feels like to be breathing here, the more frequently you'll be able to catch yourself when you're breathing that way and make changes if you need to. So the third pattern is going to give us an opportunity to really get some familiarity with the feeling of the breath moving up into the apex of the lungs. So feeling the lifting that happens under the collarbones and up under the shoulders. If you just pay attention to that, it's very subtle. So what I'm going to invite us to do is to actually start with a little bit of posture here. So the first thing to do is just I like to cross my hands for this rather than doing it this way. Let your fingers just rest in the little hollow above your collarbones. And you can press down there just a teeny little bit. Tuck your chin just a little. And as you breathe in and out, just notice if you can feel any subtle little lifting up under the collarbones, under your fingers. It's very subtle, you might not notice it. Don't fuss if you don't. So I'm going to invite you to exaggerate this posture a little bit more. Give yourself a big hug. So let your hands cross over and hold on to your shoulders, if that's possible for you, or make whatever modifications you need for this posture-wise. So now you're hugging yourself. Tuck your head down even a little bit further. You'll notice that your shoulders want to roll forward just a little bit, and your head too a little. And then as you continue to breathe, as you breathe in, notice how you can feel the whole shoulder area tend to want to lift up on the inhale and drop back down on the exhale. In fact, if you took a really long, deep inhale, you'd probably feel the whole trunk wanting to lift upward towards the shoulders. Okay, so there's one more posture that we can use, and this is the one that I would also suggest that you might want to practice at home. This is good too. But this posture, you're going to lift your arms up overhead and turn your palms behind you. If you have any shoulder issues, just make whatever adaptations you need. And let the hands come down onto the back of your shoulders so your elbows are sort of aiming toward the ceiling. And then as you hold this posture, you'll notice that in this posture, your belly's tight and your chest is tightened up, so both your belly and your chest aren't going to be contributing quite as easily, and you might actually feel the lifting up under the shoulders a little bit more clearly. So breathing in, feel the lifting, exhaling, feel the letting go, the dropping down. Then letting the arms come down again, but keeping attention in the area of the shoulders, the collarbones, seeing if you can stay connected with that feeling of the breath lifting up under the shoulders on the inhale, dropping down of the shoulders on the exhale. So once again, my encouragement to you is to practice each of these three components. So you really develop an acute familiarity with your breathing. Don't just take breathing for granted. The autonomic nervous system, which I'll be saying a little wee teeny bit more about in a few minutes, is called automatic or autonomic because it was felt to be entirely involuntary. But your breath is not. Your breath is one of those things that you have quite intimate capacity to moderate. And one of the very first things the body does to affect physiological and psychological change is to modify your breath. So you can begin to get a lot of capacity and a lot of capability in self-regulation by working with your breath. In fact, I read an article about a month ago now that said, move over mindfulness, breathing is here. So the scientists have returned to studying the rhythms of breathing and the patterns of breathing and finding them quite dramatically affecting our health and well-being. So it's a really critical piece of the work. So you have to build your familiarity with those. So, yep.
So you mentioned the three different types of biofeedback. Like, to me, belly seemed most apparent. Chest, not as apparent.
Yep.
Shoulders, I couldn't notice.
Yep.
Does it depend on your different types of breathing? Or, like, if it's more apparent in the belly, why do you focus on the other two as well?
Just to learn them, to be familiar with them.
Will they all happen in unison?
Yeah, so I'm just about to go there, but we don't breathe with just one of those things, and we don't really breathe with them so much in sequence either. They do happen in a synchronous, unified, integrated way. Well, I'm inviting you to practice them individually so that you'll build your familiarity with each of those different components, so you can feel, you get really familiar with what that is. Because when you have an emotion, fear, for example, your breathing will be more one way than another. And if you're not able to sense that, if you're not able to actually feel that directly and be familiar with it, you won't know. So we use the breathing practices to help build our familiarity and our skill sets. And then, of course, that's going to allow us to make the self-regulation happen.
So if you're more anxious state,
Then you'll start to, exactly, you'll start to notice, oh, look at that, I'm breathing with my, or I'm holding my breath even, or it's way up here, right? And then you can go, oh yeah, and move it down. So, as I just pointed out, Mother Nature doesn't design us to breathe with just one of those. All three of those things are meant to work together in a unified and integrated way in a synchronous way, your body already knows how to do that. Although we may have forgotten it because we focused in over habit on one aspect. I can't really teach you how to get back to that, but I can give you a couple of metaphors that will help you practice. So one metaphor for this, what you might think of as full 3-part breathing, is to imagine your breath flowing into a cylinder from the bottom to the top. So the breath flows in, belly expands, chest expands, shoulders move up, breath flows out, shoulders drop, chest falls in, belly collapses. The other metaphor is to imagine your breath like a wave that's flowing up onto the shore. It flows up, rolls over, and flows out smoothly. You follow? So I'm going to invite you to work with both of those metaphors concurrently if you can. And we're going to start by breathing in 3 sniffs. So each inhale will have 3 sniffs. 1 sniff into the belly, 1 sniff into the chest, 1 sniff into the collarbones. And then a long, slow exhale. So let's just do that together. Sniff belly, sniff chest, sniff collarbones, long, slow exhale. So you'll notice the exhales naturally a lot smoother. Sniff belly, sniff chest, sniff collarbones, long, slow exhale. Now, as you keep sniffing, see if you can begin to soften the sniffs. See if you can begin to run the belly, the chest, and the collarbones together into one smooth inhale, like the wave, rather than 3 jerky components to the inhale on the wave. See if you can make it smoother. So it just comes with practice, but start with the 3 sniffs. Sometimes it's helpful to count the sniffs. 1, 2 into the belly, 3, 4 into the chest, 5, 6 into the shoulders, for example, and then back out again. If the counting helps, do it. If not, let it go. And then begin to soften the sniff. See if you can begin to feel the belly opening, the chest opening, and the shoulders lifting almost at the same time. One more time. So I'm going to invite you again to play with these breathing practices and the full 3-part breath for the rest of your life. You're always breathing, you just need reminders to practice these things. Our normal breathing, where's my bottle? The average person is probably going to take a breath that's not going to be too much more than that container, somewhere around 750 or 1,000 cc's. The medical texts tell us that the normal full breath is going to be somewhere around 1,200 cc's. And your lung capacity, if I were to take a big breath in as full as I could, let it all the way out, and then take another big breath in as full as I could, my full lung capacity is going to be near 10 times that. So when I'm breathing and I'm not using my diaphragm efficiently, what's happening to my breath volume? It's diminishing. So if I'm getting a less volume of breath with each cycle of breathing, what's going to happen to my breath rate? It's going to have to go up. So if I can begin to practice more full, if you'd like, 3-part breathing periodically through the day, I'm going to begin to get, I'm not going to be cheating myself with my breath so much, and I'll begin to decrease my breath rate. Now that's important because it takes energy to breathe. one of the reasons that people who are in the intensive care unit get put on a ventilator is because they don't have the energy to do the work of breathing. They put them on the ventilator to do the work of breathing for them. So we can actually improve our energy efficiencies by slowing our breathing down. Not only that, slow breathing, down around 5-6 breaths a minute, is really speaking to that relaxed system, which is quite different than the very rapid breathing that you get when you're running away from lions. So practice the breathing. So there's 2 more breathing practices that I'd like to share with you. Then I'm going to take this off and we'll get you to take a 2-minute break while you do all that. And I'll put more stuff on the board. But the next breathing practice that I'd like to share with you, I'm going to invite you to stand up for. This is going to make use of the 3 sniffs on the inhale, like I just shared with you. This is called breath of joy. They don't call it breath of joy for no reason. If any of you have done any yoga, you might have come across it. I'm going to invite you to stand with your feet a little bit more than hip-width apart and just a little gentle bend in the knees. If you have issues with your ankles or your knees or your hips or your back or your neck or your shoulders, make whatever modifications you need to do this comfortably for yourself. So what we're going to do here is you're going to breathe in with those 3 sniffs. Sniff for the belly, sniff for the chest, sniff for the collarbones, but we're going to use our arms to help regulate that. So the sniff in the belly, your arms are going to come out to the front. The sniff for the chest, your arms are going to come to the side. So you can actually feel that when you lift up like this, you can feel your chest wanting to lift up and out. And the sniff for your shoulders, your hands are going to come up overhead. So it'll look like this. And then on the exhale, we open our mouth. This is the one we're going to do with our mouth open. Make an ah sound. And on the exhale, bend the ankles, bend the knees, bend the hips, swing the arms and flex the back to the degree that that's possible for you, even just making it a mindset if you have to. So it'll look like this. Belly, chest, collarbones. Belly, chest, collarbones. Okay, let's do it. Belly, chest, collarbones. Front, side, overhead. Front, side, overhead. Belly, chest, collarbones. Belly, chest, collarbones. Front, side, overhead. 3 more. Take a big breath in. Hold it for a moment. See if you can take a little more. And then a long, slow exhale. And then just notice what's here. What's the echo, the after effect of that breathing? What's happening with your heart? What's happening with your muscles? What's happening to your energy? It's energizing, picking you up. This is a really good breathing practice to do if you're dragging yourself out of the bed in the morning. It's a really good practice to do for a short time at 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon when your energy takes a dip. It's a really good practice to do anytime you feel like you need a little burst of energy. It's energizing. Breath of joy. If you want to discover why they call it breath of joy, practice this and slowly build up to about 10 or 11 minutes of it. See what happens. All right.
Breath of confusion. Doing so much
Well, so
it's hard to focus on what
yeah,
you're
so,
doing.
well, that's why
That's part of it.
that's why it's called practice, right?
You
So
don't want that distraction too. Your body's so moving, right? Like it takes up all of that space.
So come back to sitting. Here's the last breathing practice we're going to share with you. This practice, to make it simple, I refer to it as pulling breath. So pulling breath looks like this. On the inhale, you're going to reach up. Imagine you're grabbing a bar that's on a pulley, And on the exhale, you're going to pull it down. So the inhale, exhale. So you're going to do this in and out through your nose. Now here's the piece with pulling breath. You're doing this fairly abruptly. Each breath is abrupt, and you're using your belly aggressively. So the inhale, exhale, it's like you're pumping. In fact, if you were in a yoga class, they would refer to this as bellows breath. It's like a bellows. You follow? If you take this image, it's the same thing. You're going to notice the belly doing this.
A little puppet.
Yeah. So let's do this. When you breathe in, look up. When you breathe out, look down. Two more. Big breath in. Hold it. See if you can take a little more. And a long, slow exhale. And again, just notice, what's the echo? What's the after effect of that? That too is a little energizing. And if you've gone a little too fast, you probably get a little lightheaded. So if you get lightheaded when you practice at home, slow it down. Take a little break. It's normal. Just keep practicing. So we've just shared with you essentially 5 breathing practices. Breath of joy, belly breath, chest breath, collarbone breath, and pulling breath. This is energizing. This is energizing. These tend to be somewhat energizing, and this breath is calming. So now you have the capacity to start to make use of your breathing to regulate how you're feeling, to bring some energy when you need it if you're in a little bit of a slump, to calm yourself down if you're feeling agitated. Not only that, as you practice these breathings, they start to have significant effects on your physiological system and helping your autonomic system be more responsive and not so fixed. There's a yoga organization from India, came to North America decades ago, called the Art of Living, who have taught their version of this with their breathing patterns include much of what I've just shared with you, but with a very specific rhythm and a few other aspects of yoga built into them. And they've researched those patterns, much like I've shared with you, and other medical practitioners have begun to research those patterns as well. And they've consistently found that when people practice these patterns of breathing regularly, pretty much every day, that they actually have a profound effect on helping those people work with depression, anxiety, and PTSD particularly. In fact, the American Armed Forces are now using the Art of Living's version of the rhythm and the sequence of breathing and some of the other yoga components of that to help their veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan with PTSD. So these breathing practices have a huge impact on our physiology and our psychology, and most of us take our breathing for granted, and I'm just inviting you to stop doing that. Any questions about it?
Through the run of the day, would you target to try and do these 3 times, 10 times?
Whatever you'd like.
All day.
Whatever you'd like. Just do it. If you have the capacity to do it frequently, do it really frequently. If your capacity to begin with is just to do it once or twice, just do it once or twice. Start with what's comfortable and build on it a little bit. Ultimately, when you put all this together in a formal regimen, if you were going to do them all together as a practice, it would probably take you about 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. But you can practice each of these separately anytime through the day. You might be sitting in your office and you take a little moment and you go this and you go, oh yeah. And you can take a few of those chest breaths. Or you could go, oh yeah, and take a few of those belly breaths. So the idea here is to set it up so you just, if you'd like, remember to do it. That's all. So you need as many reminders to remember to do it as you can get. The remembering is another way of understanding being mindful, mindfulness. Okay, I'm going to take this off the board and I'm going to set us up for the next sequence of practices. And a whole, almost an hour, a bit of practice around breathing and understanding that. So again, my invitation to you is don't take your breathing for granted. Work at it. Be attentive to it. Get familiar with it. Play with it. Excuse me, literally, play with it. So we're going to shift gears. We'll come back to the breathing in a minute. We're going to move into a period of focused attention. The practice that we're going to do right now, I'll explain. I'll guide you in it. It's not very much different than the grounding practice. But we won't do it for very long because that focused attention practice is also part of the relaxation practice that I'm going to share with you. So we'll be repeating it in a few minutes as well. So again, I'm just going to invite you to sit comfortably, feet a little bit more than hip width apart, bringing your back a little away from the back of the chair so you're not slouching. Invite the elbows to hang beneath the shoulders. Let the hands come to rest on the thighs or fold in the lap if that's comfortable for you. Imagine that your shoulder blades are like little pads of butter and they're melting with the heat of the body and they're sinking down your back into your back pockets. So feel the shoulders soften and drop with that imagery. Notice that the neck stays long. Invite the eyes to soften. Maybe invite the jaw to open just a teeny bit. Leave the tongue gently connecting to the palate just behind the teeth. Feel the jaw soften. Invite a soft smile in the eyes and a soft smile in the face and a soft smile in your heart. And then very purposefully, turn attention once again to the feeling of the body sitting and to the feeling of the body being breathed, of breath coming in and going out. So in this practice of focused attention, unlike the breathing practices we were just doing, we're not in any way, shape, or form trying to modify, control, or manipulate our breathing. We're simply generating interest in what it feels like to be breathing and inviting our attention and awareness to experience the breath just as it is, moment by moment, in-breath by in-breath, out-breath by out-breath. If you notice that you've begun to try and control or manipulate the breathing, just smile. See if you can leave the manipulation alone and just come back to feeling the breath just as it is on the inhale and the exhale. You might also notice that the mind wanders off to other things, that you don't stay so focused on the breath. The mind goes to going home later, or to something we just covered, or the mind goes to a conversation earlier in the day, or to a conversation you're expecting tomorrow, or maybe the mind goes to a sound or to some sensation in the body. Anytime you notice that your mind has wandered away from this chosen focus of the breath, in the moment that you notice that you've been distracted, you're actually back paying attention. You know what's going on, which is what we're training. So in the moment that you notice you've been distracted, the invitation is to smile. Reward yourself for catching the distraction, rather than getting fussed and angry and frustrated with yourself. Acknowledge the distraction and smile. I caught it. And then very purposefully, just leave the distraction alone. If you'd like, leave it in the background. You don't need to do anything to get rid of it. You don't need to try to stop it. Just leave it alone, and then purposefully, again with a smile, being kind to yourself, purposefully regulate, self-direct your attention back to your chosen focus, to the breath, picking up the breath wherever you are in the breathing cycle as you return. And our invitation is to do this over and over and over again. Every time we notice the distractions, we smile, leave it alone, come back to the breath. Now, in that regard, it might be helpful as we do this to find that place in your body where your awareness of the feeling of the breath stands out for you the most. So for some people, that's the actual feeling of the flow of the air around the nostrils. Or maybe it's the flow of the air a little farther back in the nose or the nasal pharynx. Or maybe it's the flow of the breath and the expansion of the chest on the inhale, or the movement of breath in the belly on the exhale or the inhale. That place where the breath really stands out for you can function like an anchor point for you to come back to find the breath whenever you notice you've been distracted. One of the things that the researchers have been able to show us is that for the average person, we lose our focus, we lose our attention, we get distracted about 6 to 10 times a minute. So there's no point in getting frustrated with this, it's just human nature. When you notice the distractions, smile and reward yourself for catching it, and then come back. So in a moment, I'll ring the chime to end this short focused attention practice, and I'll just invite you when you hear the chime to let go of awareness of the breath and regulate your attention to the sound. So this is just a short version of a focused attention practice. Now, if you break it down into its bits and pieces, you're giving yourself a specific experience that's carrying a demand, actually a series of demands. The first demand is choose X to pay attention to. So you're starting off regulating your attention. So the experience is be attentive to this one thing. So the one thing that we just worked with was the breath. And then what happens? You forget your intention to pay attention to the breath, and your mind goes off somewhere. Gets distracted. And then what happens? At some point, could be right away, or it could be 5 minutes, or even an hour later, you go, oh my goodness, look at that, I'm not paying attention to so-and-so anymore. So at some point, you recognize your distraction. In the point that you've recognized your distraction, you are actually back paying attention, which is what we're working on, the awareness. So in that moment, smile, reward yourself, be kind to yourself, acknowledge your distraction, and recognize you don't need to do anything about the distraction. Just leave it alone. Our natural tendency will be to want to get rid of it, to fix it, to make it go away, to make it stop. And of course, the more you do that, the more difficult it's going to be to get rid of it. So we just leave the distraction alone, and then very purposefully regulate your attention once again by remembering your intention and returning your attention to your focus, to your task, whatever that task was. Now, if you keep doing that, you've got a training effect now happening with a series of demands. First demand, regulate attention. Second demand, notice distractions. Third demand, smile, be kind to yourself. Fourth demand, regulate attention once again. Over and over and over again. And of course, what will happen with time is you might begin to notice that the distractions aren't so frequent, and they don't hold you for so long, you come back easier. You start to smile more often, and you're kinder to yourself and others because you've been practicing it. And when you sustain your attention for longer periods of time on something, what do we call that? Sustained attention is called? No, sustained attention is called the opposite of that. Focus? Concentration. Yeah. So what you're doing here is you're actually building your concentration muscle. You follow? And then, of course, the feedback from that is all of a sudden your awareness is growing. You're starting to actually see and understand and appreciate more things with less reactivity. So I'm inviting you to practice that over and over and over again. You're always breathing through the course of the day, so you could actually just take some time, and instead of manipulating the breath like we did with the first one, you could take a moment and just be attentive to the feeling of the breath like we just did. Or you could be attentive to the feeling of a body movement as you reach into the cupboard. Or you can be attentive to what else? Yeah, you could be attentive to any of the tasks of the day. In other words, you have the opportunity to practice this focused attention every single moment of every single day and not have to take any time out of your day to do it. All you have to do is, it's gone, remember, be mindful, remember to pay attention to the task. And of course, when we're doing that, what mode are we in? Executive attention mode. And of course, when you go off in your distractions, what have you gone to? Default mode. So you recognize, default mode, come back. You follow? Okay. Any questions about that? All right, so let me just set the stage for the relaxation practice. Now the reason, as I said earlier, the reason that I share this very specific form of practice is that it comes to us out of close now to 50 years of hardcore research at Harvard University's mind-body medicine laboratories. It was developed by a chap named Herbert Benson, who's an internal medicine doctor at Harvard, who started working on these things back in the late 60s. And really what we're doing is working with our autonomic nervous system. I mentioned that earlier. That's that ancient system that is mostly involuntary but has voluntary aspects to it. So we're making use of the voluntary aspects of this system to help us regulate our own autonomic nervous system. To make it very simple, once again, simplifying the complexity of all of this, the autonomic nervous system has two sides to it. One side is called the sympathetic nervous system, and it's, if you'd like the gas pedal. When the sympathetic nervous system is turned on, it's like the gas pedal's down, the system's revved up, you're gobbling energy consumption. And that's your protection systems. This is your avoidance system. This is what drives your avoidance system. On the other side of the coin, there's what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. The ganglia, the nerve centers for the sympathetic nervous system, tend to run down the center of the body. The parasympathetic nervous system tends to run down beside the sympathetic. So para is a Greek word that means beside. So the parasympathetic nervous system you can think of like the brake. You put the brake on, it slows down, it calms down, it gives us the rest and renew. It's often referred to as rest and digest. It conserves and renews our energies. This is the parasympathetic nervous system that is being engaged when we're relaxed breathing. It's the system that might at some point also be engaged as we focus our attention on just one thing and our concentration grows. So this practice that is called the Benson-Henry Relaxation Protocol, I'd like to think of it more as a meditation, because if you think of it as a relaxation, your mindset's going to be, I do this, I'll feel relaxed. And it's not that straightforward. I like to think of these two, just to make metaphorically, think of them like different rooms in your house of view, your house of well-being. These rooms are not adjacent to each other. There's a big, long hallway. So as you're practicing, you're starting to walk down the hallway, if you'd like, from here to there. You're leaning yourself more in this direction. And as the more you practice, the hallway, if you'd like, gets shorter, metaphorically speaking. The practice has several steps to it, 8 or 9 steps in the original description of it. But I'm going to boil those down to 4 to make it very straightforward for you. Those 4 steps happen in 2 phases. The first phase, you're giving yourself a specific experience that carries a specific demand. And that demand is engage in experiences that are going to switch you from there to there. In the second phase, you're giving yourself an experience that carries the demand, let's stay over here, like Mother Nature designed us. Mother Nature wants you to be in this mode virtually all the time and only shift into here in those moments when you need to have a burst of energy and get away from the lions to meet the demands. And then that shuts down and you go back to here. But if we end up living mostly in avoidance because of all those things that we talked about, then this is running in high gear and this is in low gear, if you'd like. The first phase has 3 simple steps. The first step I like to think of as preparing the body. So we'll do a teeny bit of movement. In the research, they used what's called progressive muscular relaxations. That's where you tighten up and let go. So we'll do a version of that. The second step is relaxed belly breath, just like we did earlier. feeling the breath in the belly for a few moments. And then the third step is a period of focused attention. And tonight, we'll just use the breath like we just did, but it doesn't have to be the breath. It could be pretty much anything that you want it to be, including a prayer or an image or a word. The second phase is a period of visualization or imagery. You're going to purposefully see yourself in your mind's eye in a experience or a state of well-being. So that is going to be feeling safe, happy, at ease, no symptoms. Comfortable, in other words. When I was a kid, we used to say, oh, I'm on cloud 9. So this is a cloud 9 experience, or going to your happy place, as the psychologist would invite. This could be a memory from the past. I'll give you a simple example, a memory that I just popped into my head, so I think I got to share it with you for some reason. When I was a youngster growing up in Toronto, I lived near the airport that was just being developed. It was just a small little thing back then. There was still a one-room schoolhouse that I used to drive by on my bike. There was a big old chestnut tree not too far from the airport. And we used to play conkers, I won't get into that, but we used to go and get chestnuts from this chestnut tree. But while we were collecting the chestnuts, we'd leave the bikes down and we'd lie on the grass and watch the planes come over top. And that was cloud 9 when I was a kid. So just feeling that, I can feel that, shit. Life is just as it needs to be. Nothing needs to be different. So if you have a memory that meets those criteria for you, where you really feel happy and connected and easeful and not sick or ill with anything, then just bring that memory to mind and relive it. If nothing pops into your head that way, which is really common for many of us, then just make something up. Do what the psychologist would invite you to do and go to your happy place, whatever that might look like. A sandy island someplace in the sun, or maybe it's a swimming pool, or maybe it's picking apples in the fall. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe it's just doing a hobby, baking cakes or making cookies or knitting, doing yoga. Often you could just do the hobby in your mind's eye. Maybe it's playing an instrument and you can play a piece of music. You follow? This visualization is also very much a period of focused attention. You're trying to keep yourself focused on this feeling of well-being. Very much like an athlete sees themselves skiing down the hill, is creating the skill set for that. You're creating the skill set for well-being from the inside out. So we're inviting you to work with this. Watch for distractions. You know, often, I'll give you another simple example. Imagine that you are imagining yourself in the garden. You really like gardening, you really feel comfortable in the garden, you're content, you're getting up and you're digging weeds and you're planting stuff and you're moving around and you don't have any symptoms. And you're really connected with all that. And then imagine you see a little space in the garden and you think, oh, wouldn't a yellow rose look nice there? And the next thing you know, you're seeing yourself drive off to the nursery to look for yellow roses. Well, now you've left the image. You're expanding on it. You've gone off with a distraction. So the invitation, when you notice that any of that is happening, just come back to your bare bones visualization, to that. Really what you're doing here is you're trying to connect with that deep feeling of well-being, whether it's from a real memory or from just something you're making up. It doesn't matter. You follow? So I'll just, while I'm preparing to guide you in this, I'm going to invite you to choose something to imagine or visualize so that when we do it, you're not going to interrupt the flow of it by trying to figure out what you're going to imagine. Stay with the same thing tonight. You may find partway through that you've picked the wrong thing for yourself tonight, which is fine. Don't try to change it up, just to acknowledge that you'll do something different at home. And over the course of the next few weeks, you'll probably find something that will speak to you, and then stick with that for several weeks or even several months. All right? Okay, so to start with, we'll work with the body. I'll just invite you to stand up. So as you stand, take a moment to just feel the feet on the floor. And then very slowly, just shift your weight onto one foot. And then very slowly just shift the weight back to the other foot. Shifting back and forth. Try to make it fairly slow. The next time you shift, as you shift that weight onto that other foot, at the same time, reach up with the hand on that side, all the way up, and imagine that you're picking an apple. And then on the shift, let the apple drop back down. And as you shift to the other side, reach up and pick the apple on that side. Now as you're shifting and you're reaching up, inhale. So you're inhaling and reaching. And then on the exhale, you're dropping the hand back down as you shift back over. Feeling the movements in the body without judging them. Just sensing the body's experience without thinking about it. Pick one more apple. And then coming back to what we call relaxed mountain, just standing with your feet about hip width apart and a soft little bend in the knees, and just notice how the body is just now. Shrugging the shoulders all the way up to the ears. And then on the exhale, letting it down. One more time, shrugging all the way up. And letting it down. And then we'll do a global whole body progressive muscular relaxation, so you have a flavor for that. Step the feet a little bit more than hip width apart. Bring a little bend into the knees, pressing down into the floor. Feel the muscles of the legs tighten up. Press down, feel the floor pressing up. Imagine that you're sitting on a spring and it's pressing up as you're pressing down, so there's tension developing in the lower body. Bringing the left hand up in front of the heart, thumb pointing down, palm out. Right hand in front of that, thumb pointing up. Hook the fingers together, come into what's called bear grip. And now, as you press down with the feet into the floor, pulling the hands apart. Keep breathing, don't hold your breath. And you notice as you do this that the trunk starts to tighten. Feel that tightening in the trunk. Feel the chest tightening, the shoulders tightening, the arms tightening. Up onto the neck. And then in the face, put a big smile. Big smile ear to ear. Raise the eyebrows even just a little bit. Get a big smile here. Keep breathing. Feel the tension. And then on the exhale, let it all go. And really feeling the release, the softening. Feel the letting go. Feel the rush of blood into the body from the tightness. And then coming back to sitting, adjusting your posture just as we've instructed before, finding that sweet spot where your feet are a little bit more than hip width apart, hands resting on the thighs, elbows hanging beneath the shoulders, soft gaze on the floor in front of you, or even closing the eyes if that's comfortable for you. You might want to start by letting the left hand come to rest on the belly once again. that's just a reminder that for the next moment or two, we're going to bring attention to the belly. And very specifically sense and feel that soft belly, relaxed breathing. You might even want to exaggerate that like we did earlier, just to remind yourself of this practice of soft belly breath. And then we can very purposefully let go of the soft belly breathing specifically. The hand can come back onto the thigh or rest in the lap if you'd like. And then very purposefully focusing attention on the feeling of the breath like we just did a little while ago with the focused attention practice. Perhaps focusing in at that anchor point for yourself. And once again, noticing the in-breath and the out-breath without manipulation, without control. Just deepening your awareness of the feeling of the body being breathed. Watching the breath, allowing it just as it is, bringing attention back to it again and again and again whenever you notice it's wandered away. So we can invite ourselves at this point to let go of our focus of attention on the experience of the body being breathed, and very purposefully now shift our attention and awareness to our visualization, to our imagery, whatever that might be for you. Bringing that image, that memory, that deep sense of well-being to your mind and heart. And just staying with that. Content, happy, no symptoms, free, at ease, relaxed, connected, calm, loved, respected, cared for. Perhaps feeling a deep sense of gratitude for this memory or this image that you're able to create. So my invitation to you is to get in the habit of playing with this relaxation protocol. For all intents and purposes, it has 4 components to it. Gentle movements with the body that you give attention to. You can do that through the course of the day because you're always moving. You can give attention to those things. Relaxed belly breath. We've already invited you to start practicing being attentive to the breath. You're already breathing. You don't need extra time. Just do these things as short snippets through the day. Focused attention on the breath or on a word or on a task. Get in the habit of practicing focused attention for short snippets through the day. Find your visualization, find what creates for you on the inside that sense of well-being. Just keep playing with it till you find that thing that really speaks to you. And then do it frequently for short snippets through the day, bringing some gratitude to that experience. So I'm inviting you to do those 4 components as short snippets through the day until you're really familiar with them. And then package it together. Do them in sequence. Step 1, then step 2, then step 3. You can do that all by itself. You can do that all by itself. And then you can put the whole thing together, steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Traditionally, the first phase is done for about 12 minutes, and the second phase for about 8 minutes. So if you're packaging them all together, you'll get a 20-minute meditation. But if you're not familiar and comfortable sitting still for that prolonged period of time right off the bat, which a lot of people aren't, don't start at 20 minutes. Start at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, whatever's comfortable, and slowly build up to that 20 minutes. Ultimately, the invitation is to do this as a meditation, if you'd like, for 20 minutes daily. Now, 40 years ago, when they first started with this research, what they discovered was that it conserved our energy. We used less oxygen. We had less tone and tension in our muscles, so it was providing some relaxation. Our breathing slowed down, our blood pressure dropped, our heart rate slowed down. Blood flowed into the periphery rather than being shut down in the skin. And then as they developed more and more capacities for research, in the last 15 years, the research around this has gotten right down into how it changes your genes and how they work. It doesn't actually change the gene itself. What they've been able to show is that when people get into the habit of a 20-minute-a-day practice, within as early as 8 or 10 weeks of practice, they begin to change how over 1,500 genes in this system are turning on and turning off. This is called epigenetics. If you want to read the science, it's the science of epigenetics. They've also been able to show that this has a profound positive influence on energy production. It supports the little mitochondria that produce the energy in your cells, the energy factories. It's been shown to make for more efficient use of insulin in the productions of your energy systems. It's been shown to be anti-inflammatory. It's been shown to support your immune system functions, and it's been shown to support your longevity systems. And they're still working at the material that they've collected over the years of the research. So this is why I suggest you start off your relaxation practice using some version of this protocol. In the focused attention practice, when you notice you've been distracted, they invite you to take a passive disregard for the distraction. Disregard means you're not giving it your attention, passive means you're not trying to push it away or fight it in any way. You're just not turning your attention there. So very similar to what I suggested, smile, leave it alone, bring your attention actively back to your focus. You follow? So, once you've got really familiar with this, there's lots of ways you can expand it, and you can do yoga and other forms of breathings that are all probably going to be a part of this. But it was this sort of protocol that showed that benefit in the research. And very few of these practices have been researched to the depth that this one has. Okay, any questions? So hopefully you've been able to understand why I'm inviting you to focus in on these three things. They're really getting to the fundamental base of everything. That autonomic nervous system, your approach and avoidance systems are in the driver's seat. Even though we think we've got all this fancy modern brain, if we're not doing something to bring some balance into the way these systems are working, we're behind the eight ball. So my invitation is to really start with the fundamental stuff and work on that and slowly build over time. Alrighty. Any questions? All right. Thank you for being here, and thank you guys for recording us. Hopefully it all worked. So the key thing here is to remember to do these things. The remembering to do these, by definition, is part of how we understand mindfulness. So yeah, get that training effect principle out, put things to work for yourself. My invitation to you to help with that is to start off tonight or tomorrow morning and create some reminders for yourself. The best reminders are associations. Every time you see that thing, it reminds you, do this. Every time you see that thing, it reminds you, do this. Every time you hear something, it reminds you to do that. Every time you sit down in the chair, it might remind you to soft belly breathe. Every time the phone rings, it might remind you, take some time with the breath or do something else. So the more associations you create over time, the more you'll remember it, the more you remember it, the more you do it, the more you do it, the more you get the demand. Next thing you know, things start to change. All right? All righty. Well, let me go turn the lights on out there, because it is now dark, and it wasn't so awfully long ago when